All right, thank you so much. I am going to use the handheld because I am one of these excitable Americans that tends to walk around quite a bit. So before I jump in, though, I like to kind of level set the room. How many of you folks have never handwritten any CSS before and really have no desire to? Okay. On the other, how many of you can just open a copy of Notepad and write CSS whenever you want to? Okay, so it's half and half, so I'm doomed either way. All right. Well, hopefully there's something here for everybody. I've tried to find that kind of middle ground. So our agenda, well, first, just what is responsive design? What are the core components of responsive design? And then what kind of strategy can we have going forward with responsive design? Now, for those of you who aren't even sure what I'm even talking about, going back, 15 years, there was a paper documentation industry, and then this new internet thing, there were website informational systems, and never the two would meet. And then as time went on, things started to change. And especially if you're a documentarian, a lot of times we just don't have time to manage multiple systems. So whether we get into content management or single sourcing or whatever, we might find a situation where we need to write once and it just needs to display properly on whatever device it's being rendered on. So that's kind of the background of responsive design. And then finally, what I'm going to finish up with, where do we go forward? Because we've actually had about 3 different generations of responsive design techniques. And trust me, the first 2 were painful. They worked, but they were painful. All right, so as I said, what is responsive design? Well, it's a concept, and one of the first papers written on it was a gentleman by name Ethan Marcotte, and his original paper, it's actually published on a list apart. If anybody wants to look it up, it's actually it's dated by today's methodologies, but it was one of the first real research papers that looked at how do we accommodate multiple devices. And the funny thing is, when that was written, it really was almost from a direction of, okay, we're getting more and more screen resolutions on computers. Even Ethan at that time didn't see the Internet of Things and, clothes washing machines with a connected interface. So it really was kind of very future looking, this article, this paper that Ethan wrote. But he described it as a design concept to address stress points. Now, that terminology has evolved. You typically hear it called breakpoints today. But what Ethan meant by stress points, given a certain size display, your content looks good. And then as you start making it smaller and small, at some point, it stops being acceptable and becomes unacceptable. Well, that is what Ethan called a stress point. What is that exact spot where it just no longer works for the customer? Things that responsive design is not. As I talk to people, I find a lot of myth and folklore, for lack of better terms. Responsive design is not a smaller version of your page. I'm sure we've all tried to use our smartphones to look at websites where you need a microscope and you're constantly pinching and zooming and that is not responsive design. Just forcing it to fit isn't the answer. It's also not removing content to fit. I've seen this in a few places. If you've ever been to one of those websites that starts with M. a dedicated mobile, well, you go to the main page and there's 20 paragraphs and it's good stuff. And you go to the M. page and there's 4 paragraphs. It's like, okay, what did you take away from me? What are you cheating me out of here? And it's not a separate version for each and every device out there. That's kind of what started this whole thing. The amazing iPhone came out, and all of a sudden everybody started saying, well, we need a desktop version of our pages and we need an iPhone version of our pages. Well, anytime you start duplicating content, that's inefficient. So that is one of the kind of the early scenarios where responsive design was designed to solve that problem. How do we author content once and have it automatically adapt to these various devices? Okay, so what is it? What it is, it's a single version of your content. We only write content once, but it's delivered to your customer. And I use that word customer very loosely. Whoever your reader is going to be, whether it's external, internal, I mean, whether it's in a business environment, a university environment, a government environment, but it's delivered to your customer in a way that is easily understood no matter what device they're using. A tablet, a phone, in a business environment, it could be somebody who's driving around delivering packages and their little electronic display can display procedural information if they need it to. So you don't even have to know what device it will be on. Now, this causes marketing people to lose their mind because for once, they don't get to bless the presentation. Nobody knows what the presentation will be until the moment it renders. Now, it will render within guidelines we provide, but again, this makes marketing people freak out, but that's always a good thing. Did I say that? Okay, so the core components of responsive design, one, the document structure, and by that I'm really talking about the document object model, or DOM, as it's referred to. And to really extrapolate that, because we're doing kind of this was actually meant to be a 45-minute presentation, and we're doing it in 30. So we're going to highlight some bits. It really boils down to no formatting in the written content. The closer that what you write looks like it was written in Notepad, the better. Because we'll do all of the rendering and styling separately. If we're embedding formatting, we're already wrong. The second component is the cascading style sheet, the separate external rules for how the content should render. And then the third major component, and this one actually is going to morph a little bit as the future comes, but something called media queries. And that's really what gave the cascading style sheet language the brain to be able to facilitate rendering on multiple devices. All right, so by document structure, again, what I'm really talking about is keep formatting out of the core document. As an example, I'm sure nobody in here has ever done this, no hidden tables. Somebody wants some graphics, some images to render 2 across, 3 below, so they create an invisible table, put the graphics each in a cell. That might be great on a high definition desktop monitor. But when you try to send that content page to that phone, everything falls apart. So when I'm authoring this, it really, as I said, should just look like Notepad. Just text at the top, graphic, just stack the graphics up. We'll be assigning metadata to them, which we can then control from the style sheet. But we don't do the styling with hidden tables or anything like that anymore. So the CSS itself, that's the second leg of the responsive design stool. It's how we're going to control any of that content. All look, feel, and formatting, our block level elements, our character level elements. And then again, if you're not familiar, there are special elements, things like spans and divs that can be used just for applying naming conventions, which can then be controlled externally. So as I said, the more that your page looks like it was written in Notepad, the better. We don't physically want to apply any embedded styles. Now, obviously, we probably don't want it to render for the customer that way, but once we externally start applying heading level styles, content level styles, then we can get whatever rendering that we want controlled externally. And I should also point out that it's not, what's the old, see, I see some older, grayer people, you'll remember this. The younger people don't even know what WYSIWYG is. It isn't even a term used anymore. But in the old days, you know, what you see is what you get. If anybody ever used WordStar and then went to WordPerfect, you know what it means. But WYSIWYG doesn't exist anymore. This might be the desktop rendering with this gray kind of call-out box, but if it detects a smaller tablet or a smartphone, well, it could end up that this gray box is perfectly centered and all this content on the right just goes below it. So there is no WYSIWYG anymore. I mean, it's just when I write, it's very notepad looking, but give me 10 minutes with the style sheet and an editor and it will look different than that. So all of the rendering is controlled externally. And that's really not a new thing. We've been able to do that basically since CSS2 came out. But this is the part that really opened up responsive design, media queries. It's a really advanced technique that we can put into our style sheets. Now, it is part of the CSS3 specification, which is the current specification. It was derived for something in CSS2 that was called media types. Now, media types were pretty smart for their day. In one style sheet, I could say, if this is on a glass interface, I want all of my text to render in Verdana. But if somebody does a right-click print, when it goes to the printer, all the text should render in Times New Roman. We've had that capability for a long time. Not a lot of people used it, but it was in there. The problem when it comes to people like us documentarians, well, we have to do professional level things. Well, I might have to produce 4 different versions of print. I might have to do an A4 manual. I might have to do a DVD case insert. I might have to do a quick start card that goes with a product. I might have 3 different versions of print. And that was the problem with media types. There was a media type print. You got one choice. So as it evolved into media queries, well, now I have an unlimited number of choices. So media queries provide for testing the parameters of the device. So it's not only that, okay, I'm going to a smartphone, but through media queries, I can actually quiz the smartphone. I can detect, well, is this a high-end smartphone with a retina display and I render content one way, or is this just a standard cheap smartphone and I want to render my content a second way? Both of those being different than the main browser presentation on a desktop. And based on how that device answers, we can then dynamically adjust the styling rules that we apply to that document. And it all just happens literally in real time as it's rendering on the device. Now, fair warning, I am going to show some code for you beginners. Do not run from the room. You don't have to understand it. I'm just using it for presentation. But this is an example of 3 very simple media queries. It says at media, screen, meaning anything with a glass surface, and max width, 480 pixels. So that's going to be a small phone. And then I tell it, render the background color as yellow. But then it tests and says, well, if the screen is wider than 480 pixels, but less than 650 pixels, well, this is a higher resolution phone. Well, then I want the background to be red. And if this width is larger than 651 pixels, okay, now we're at a tablet or beyond. Well, now I want the background color to be green. Now, obviously, changing background colors is not very exciting. Again, just an example for people who weren't familiar. But this kind of if, then, else type of logic can be baked right into style sheets today. And it's been around for several years now. So this is not something new. The problem with it, it can get really tedious and messy. If you've ever just randomly opened up somebody's style sheet because you want to poke around a bit and there's like 5,000 lines of style sheet code, it's typically a whole lot of this stuff testing for various and different devices. Oh, and again, just proof of concept. So on a narrow screen, the background's yellow. When it detects something tablet-sized, it goes red, and then when it detects something larger, then the background goes green. Now, I could have changed the text, I could have changed the fonts, I could have changed the sizing, the white space, the margins, the flow of the page. I just chose background because it was easy to see in the back of the room. All right, so responsive design strategy. If we can change things, how do we approach this? Well, first, focus on content areas and purposes rather than this should be bold. This should have a green background. I really want to think more just kind of conceptually about my page. What is the introductory section? What are the actual steps that have to be followed? So think of each of those areas as a grid element. And so in a silly make-believe page, let's say this is like a news site that I'm in charge of. Well, maybe I have a big header area, that's the lead story or whatever is happening today, and then we have 3 content areas down below, and it doesn't matter what goes in those areas, it's just conceptually that's how I want my page to render on a desktop. Well, now through those media queries, I can now tell it that if it's on a tablet and you're viewing it vertically, well, I want header and then content 1, and then we'll render this other 2 side by side. They're less important. And if it's on a smartphone, I just want everything to render vertically. So I'm not thinking of any one specific story. I'm not thinking of any one specific article. I'm thinking conceptually, what are the major sections in my document? All right, now the evolution. That I could have done with media queries, easy peasy. So phase 1, Ethan's document spoke about stress points. We call them break points these days. We used the media queries, and we used lots of CSS to control everything. That still works today, but that's the hard way. Phase 2. We got into frameworks. Has anybody here ever heard of or used Google Bootstrap or the Zurb Foundation layer? Okay, a handful of people. I'm not going to teach you how to do it. I'm just going to give you the seeds if you want to go look it up later. It made life a lot easier. Instead of writing thousands of lines of CSS code, you only had to write hundreds of lines of CSS code, which it was still a lot of work, but boy, it automated quite a bit. Basically, it took a page, any page of content, rendering on any device, and instead of dealing with things like individual pixels or anything, it basically cut the screen into 12 vertical columns. Now, why 12? I thought 10 was, well, the problem with the number 10, it's very difficult to divide. Whereas with 12 vertical columns, if I want something to cover half the screen, it's 6. If I want something to cover a third of the screen, it's 4. If I want a quarter of the screen width, it's 3. So 12 is kind of a magic number for display purposes, better than 10. But now, instead of writing all these crazy individual pixels and everything else, well, I can just say, if it's a large device, I want 4 columns, 4 columns, 4 columns, so 4, 4, 4. Boom. Now it doesn't matter how many pixels wide that display is, my different content sections will each take up a third of the screen. Or if I have a big major center section, I could do 3, 6, 3 or 6, 3, 3. it just made it very easy without figuring out all these little, pixel values. So an example, div class row. Inside of that div class, I can say small devices, this should be 12 units wide, medium devices, 4 units wide. That's it. No more all these pixels and everything else. And so now when it renders on a phone, that would be a small device. It's using 12 columns, which is the full width of the screen. But I said medium 4, so when it renders on a tablet, I get 3 columns. So that second phase, using those frameworks, still a lot of work, but way easier than doing everything by hand using those media queries. And now phase 3. There is something relatively new. Now, for those of you in the know, you're kind of looking at me like, what do you mean relatively new? It's been around for a while. Well, again, that's where I'm on the software vendor side. We kind of have to walk that line. To us, something is relatively new when it finally works across the major browsers. Now, there are some people who want to live on the cutting edge who will do it before then, and then it only works in Chrome for a few months, and then it magically works in Safari, and then a few months later. For those people who work on the cutting edge, okay, it has been around for a few years. But the key thing for us, the new version of Internet Explorer now fully natively supports FlexBox in addition to Chrome, Safari, Firefox, Opera, all of the others. It's native CSS functionality now. It's not an add. Now, that was the thing with those foundations. They were great, but they were kind of an add-in. They were never officially released by the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium. And that kind of, I'm speaking out of school here a little bit, but that kind of gave the W3C a bit of a black eye. It's like they should have been doing that, not Google or Zerb or other. So a lot of this new FlexBox came as a result of those foundation layers. And it will work with all the same techniques that we looked at phase 1 and phase 2. I can use FlexBox inside of Google Bootstrap. I can use FlexBox techniques inside of media queries. But what FlexBox is all about is simplicity. What used to take 50 lines of CSS code is now one command. Oh, so much easier. So forget things like block and inline. Instead, think containers and items. That's kind of the new model that FlexBox uses. The container will usually be a div element, just a container. And then the items can be any content element inside of that div. So graphics, paragraphs, list item, anything you could put in a normal page. So in this case, the big blue box, that would be my div container, and it doesn't have to be visible. I've made it visible just for demonstration. And then let's say I have 3 images inside of that div container. Well, right now the div, I just named it my container. And in this case, it's actually 3 divs, but they could be 3 images, whatever I want. Now, traditionally, the way that CSS and HTML have worked, everything is just going to stack up to the left, whether I like it or not. And if I want things kind of spread out and that's where people got in trouble with the hidden tables and all that silliness. Well, now I can just write display flex and boom, it's equidistant. One command. The first time I saw this, I about fell out of my chair. You don't want to know how many hidden divs and extra CSS it took just to do something that simple even 2 years ago. So right now, I have justified content, space around. That is it, one property. And I have what's on screen. Now, the best part, and I apologize if this makes noise, I'm gonna have to put this down for a minute if I need my second hand. Let's see if I can do this with one hand. So not only does it render without the sneaky hidden table, but it auto adjusts. So it doesn't matter what device it's on. It's just, I mean, it's like magic. So that's pretty freaking cool, especially if you've ever done it by hand in the old days. So in addition to justifying content, we can also do flex wrap. And one of the other challenges in the old days, if the screen got too small, either everything just went off the edge of the page and you had a horizontal scroll bar, or everything just bunched up until you couldn't see anything anymore. It turned into a bit of a mess. So now the flex wrap option all right, so that top one, that's the old way. I have 12 boxes using old non-FlexBox. Down here, it says Flex Wrap Wrap, and it's off the screen, but it says Flex Wrap Wrap Reverse. The nice thing now is it doesn't matter what size the display device is. If instead of a desktop, we go to a tablet, we'll check out Flex Wrap. It just kept moving content down to the next row down automatically, whereas my non-Flex Wrap, it started compressing things. And if those are things like graphics or images, I only have two choices. They either get compressed and ugly, or they run off the right side of the page. And now if I go to a phone, I mean, you can actually get to a point where everything just stacks up vertically. And again, that was one CSS command. No media queries, no anything. So there's a lot of power there. Oh, and I guess it might help if I get back to PowerPoint before I hit the next button. All right, so the different FlexBox properties. I can justify content. I can wrap content automatically. There are some alignment options, so you can do kind of that hidden table functionality without the hidden table. All right. And then there's flex direction. I forgot about that one. All I have to do, if I want my boxes that are going 1 through 12 to then reverse and go 12 through 1, I just change flex direction. So I can actually, I mean, does anybody here ever have to do translation and localization for bidirectional languages? Well, imagine just changing one style sheet entry and your 12 graphics of 12 procedural steps just flipped and they read the other direction automatically. I mean, that is some cool stuff. All right, so as I said, there was not enough time in 30 minutes to make anybody an expert in responsive design, but what I've tried to do is kind of drop some seeds. If you want to do further research, the key things, the media queries still work. The foundation layers, Zurb and Google Bootstrap, still work. And now we also have the option of FlexBox. And where the real power comes in is actually using them together. I tend to use the Zurb foundation layer. I will create major sections of my document, and I'll use those 12 kind of magic grid lines. But then within those sections, I use FlexBox exclusively now. So I use the two techniques together. Now, if what I'm showing you was interesting, if that would solve a problem you see coming, there are some great tools to do further research on FlexBox. Of course, W3 Schools is always a great resource. They have recently added a whole section, not only how to teach yourself FlexBox, but there's some live interactive areas where you can practice online. There's a site called FlexBoxFroggy.com. I did not name that, but it's another good site where it's a place where you can experiment and learn the FlexBox technology. And it's a bit of a long-winded URL. If anybody wants to take a picture of that, Free Code Camp has a Learn FlexBox in 5 minutes little mini training camp. it's probably a great first step before you jump into the other two links. But these are all great resources to become familiar with FlexBox. And it's easy. I mean, I spent probably weeks coming to grips with media queries, making all kinds. I had FlexBox up and running in an hour. I mean, it's cool stuff. All right, so with that, in summary, we talked about what responsive design is, making sure that your content can be understood by any customer on any device. We talked about the core components, the structure, the CSS, and the media queries. We talked about design strategy. We don't really care about styling individual components or articles. We want to think bigger. We want to think sections. And then we talked about the evolution, the different techniques that can be applied to make our content responsive. Oops. Thank you so much, and I think we hit it right on the money.